So the first iteration of Kahntact, um, tell me about that. Kind of like how, because I mean, you're starting your own business. The big thing is how do you get those clients to pay the bills, keeping food on the table for not just yourself, your employees, because they kind of become, I mean, you stay up at night worrying about making sure you can pay them. Just some of those stresses that maybe you had early on and how you got through that.
Well, and I've thought about this a lot, and I think the biggest benefit I had is I didn't know what I was doing, and that sounds counterintuitive, but I think if I had set out to start an agency and I can go through sort of the 8-year arc and end up selling it, if that was my goal to make money and sell it, I don't think I would have. So I just had this thought in my head that if you do really good work and you're fun to work with, then someone might be attracted to that. So that was the kind of the thought I had when I started it. I was also lucky, and I think anyone who's had any success in business, who's honest, you can say I'm skilled in this, or I had this vision, or I had these people, but there is a huge element of luck. And the luck for me was, so I started in 1994. I kind of feel like we were the last one in the gate to start an agency where there were still enough mid-sized to larger clients to be had. So if you were to
Mhm.
start an agency today with all the consolidation that exists, I don't know how you would get to kind of critical mass, but we were
Yeah.
fortunate because there were companies like at the time it wasn't Arista, it was Toman Agro, which
Yeah.
was a nice mid-sized client. Cyanamid called me. They had this, what do they call it, specialty crop division, and they wanted to chunk it off and not have it go with their mainstream. So there were enough mid-sized clients. And eventually, I caught a huge break because Art Sterling, who was with Pioneer Hybrid at the time, decided that he wanted to have some Canadian marketing support. And he was gracious enough and kind enough to hire us. And that was our first major. Once we had Pioneer Hybrid on our nameplate, life became a lot easier. The other thing, Rhett, to be honest with you, is when I started the business, I had a 16-month-old, a newborn, and no income. So
Yeah.
that's what I call the pedal fast model. And again, I won't say it was strategic. I left Ginty's because I was unhappy and angry. And Julie basically said, either you do something else or we're going to have a problem here because I'm not dealing with this every day. And, having been around, I think it was in my DNA. My
Yeah.
dad and uncle were extremely entrepreneurial. They would do these crazy side business deals, which I won't get into. So I think I had it in my blood to do it. And then one day I just took the step. And then, once you're on the boat and the boat's left the port, it's like the roller coaster. Once you get on and the
Yeah.
thing's going up, you're along for the ride.
Start paddling. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. No, it's awesome. And you're right. I mean, um, I've had people in the past say never start an agency unless you have a client first, right? But those were
Yep.
the days where you could, it'd be real hard right now just to start off fresh. So good timing. Timing's a big factor, right? So
Yep.
you do talk, like we could probably talk for an hour on of those 8 years, right? Because there was a lot that happened there. Talk me about kind of that progression of Kahntact in those 8 years and eventually your first sale of Kahntact.
So I think the big turning point for us was we were invited to pitch the bear animal health business, which was probably 4 to 5 times larger than the sum total of the rest of our business. And this is a bit of a funny story. So we went in and we were pitching against two very established agencies, Ad Farm and Ad Culture. So there's Ad Farm, Ad Culture, both of which, if I was on the client side, I would have chose before Kahntact. There was us like 3 years in the business, to the point where I had done some work with the Parker Group. I think they were called Ad Farm by then. And I called Bob Corrigan like a week before the pitch, and I just choked. And I said, why don't we pitch it together or I'll bolt onto you? And, rightly so. He said, no, we're good. So I went in and it was that nothing to lose. And the client was a guy named Bill Buckner. And Bill is really a smart, driven guy. And I was intimidated and I was sweating bullets. As it turns out, the decision committee was 5 people. There were two who wanted Kahntact, two who wanted one of the other two. And the deciding vote came down to a guy named Jim McAllister, who I'd gone to school with. And Jim picked us. And I'm so grateful, Jim, thank you so much. He goes, Len, I now control you. I knew all three agencies could do the job, but now you owe me.
Yeah, that's
Jim has since passed away, sadly, a few years ago, but we weren't close in school, but we knew each other. And, I think there's a comfort with that. And that goes back to that University of Guelph and, the alumni and the connections you make there. So here we are, and all of a sudden we're probably the third largest agency in Canada in ag. And all of a sudden, I can't remember exactly how this happened. Tom Schmidt was working with me, and somehow he connected with Kim McConnell, who was running his agency, Fieldstone, and they had landed one of the precursors to Bear. What will take me back in time? It was Aventus.
yes.
Before Bear.
So Aventus would have been one of those. Yeah.
Anyway, so Kim was the agency of record, and he had committed to them that he would open up an Eastern office. And Kim and I got into a bit of a pissing contest about it. Like, I'm going to open up an office and put you out of business. And I said, well, you move here and it'll be a short stay and you'll be back in Calgary. And eventually he said, well, why don't we buy you? And it actually threw me into a shock, because shame on me, I had never thought about where this agency is going. We were just going. We were on the roller coaster. And it actually threw me for a loop. And I said, how about a partnership? And he said, we don't do partnerships, we do acquisitions. So wasn't sure what to do. So I called a friend. What's that game show? $64 million. I called a friend, and the friend I called was Jay Bradshaw, who you know. Jay was the head of Syngenta at the time. He had been working at Cyanamid at the time. And Jay laughed in my face. We went out for a beer, and he said, are you freaking kidding me? Someone's offering you more than a nickel for an advertising agency? Are you nuts? Meaning, do the deal. Yeah. And I didn't understand that either. He said, you're a service industry. You have no contracts. You're not like Magna supplying Chrysler and you've got a 10-year contract. And I actually, my heart almost stopped, one of those moments, uh-oh. So I got on the phone pretty darn quick with Kim and said, hey, we should do a deal. So the deal actually did make sense for both parties. It got Kim his office in the East. And 6 months into it, so we're talking about 2022, they turned around and merged with the Parker Group to form AdFarm. So within, a year, I'd gone from goofy little contact marketing in Guelph to being part of what today is RR46, because Roger Ryerson, the head of RR46, was a partner at the time, as was Art Freilich. So it was a pretty impressive group of people. But to be blunt, I stumbled into it. In a way, I mean, part of the deal is if you're not in the game, you're not in the deal. So I was in the game, but again, there's that element of luck. I just happened to be in business in Guelph at a time where a major competitor wanted to get into our market space.
Yeah. And that's where, is that where you wouldn't have been the first time you met Kim, but I know he's been an important mentor in your life too, but maybe that was the first time.
Actually, it was pretty close to the first time. Like, Kim was doing the same thing on a larger scale than I was, I think. I mean, I shouldn't speak for Kim, but he was working pretty hard. And Kim was actually, I think, someone should write the history of our industry someday, but I think Kim may have been the first, either Kim or Adrian Bailey, because to start an ag-focused communications company. And I think his first client may have been Dow back in the day. So I'd have to check my facts, but Kim was an early mover in this space, because most of the time companies in our industry would work with a traditional agency or do it in-house. And Kim said, why don't we have, why don't I start a firm that will, focus and specialize on ag? But I really didn't know Kim. My connection was through the Parker Group folks. So I had had a really good relationship with Ross Harvey, Bob Corrigan, Ian Fitzgerald, Craig Manis. It was like quite I'm sure I'm missing Glenn Dawes, who is still with AdFarm. So I was in that loop, but not so much the Kim loop. And I think I met Kim through this need to put a deal together. And yeah, Kim's one of my mentors and consider him a good friend as well.
So how long were you once you sold the business, because you stayed with the business? How long, what was that timeline?
I did. I stayed through 2006. My plan had been to stay for 3 years and help transition.
Yep.
But again, I'm not a very planful person, which I'm not bragging about it. It's just I tend to just be able to deal with what's in front of me. So I vaguely had a 3-year or 4-year plan and wasn't sure what I was going to do next. So I stayed for 4. To be honest, Rhett, it's a hard thing to do, to sell a business and then stay with it. And it's
Mhm.
not that, the people at Ad Farm were great, the culture was great, the values, but I just felt constrained again. I had that feeling, uh-oh, like here come the walls again. And it
Yeah.
was me, not them, right? It's like, it's not you, it's me. It was definitely me. So I stayed the 4 years. I took a year off. I had a friend who was starting a company in the medical information field. I did that for a year, and then I had a vision, start an agency without people, and I called it Marketing 911, and I started that in 2007.
So that's the first, so we'll call that the freelancer model. So your first iteration of Kahntact, you hired employees, more traditional sense
Well,
of model,
so
or
my intention was not to do that,
yeah,
but every time, and this ended up being true in Kahntact version 2, every time I try to inflict that model on a multinational, they'd go, no,
yeah,
we
yeah,
want stability, we want to bill by the hour. And I ended up, it's always been a bit of a hybrid, so there's
okay,
a very thin line between a contractor and an employee.
yep,
But I always had this idea of having not a traditional bricks and mortar where all your resources are in the building, so to speak.
yeah,
But again, once you start getting in business with larger firms, they have a rhythm and they want you to follow it. And in general, the agency will conform to the client, not the other way around. So even Kahntact version 1. Or yeah, Kahntact version 1.0 started there, and we ended up, I'd say, almost entirely with employees.
yeah.
And the other thing too is talent. In our business, talent is the key. And at that time, I think it may have changed a bit. More people wanted to be employees than
Yeah,
contractors.
right,
Yeah.
right. So
So
how
I, I
did
did
you,
I did start this second iteration with
right,
this time I'm going to do it. And
yeah,
about 6 months in, I got a call from Joanne Hewitson at DuPont, and she said, "I think we just fired Ogilvy, our global agency, from our ag division. Would you like to pitch our business?" And I said, "It's just me, Joanne. I'm not sure you're going to want me. Do your thing, put some people together." So I did, and we put some people together, and we ended up kind of winning the business. We won the business. The United States wasn't clear that DuPont Canada had the right to do an agency review, so they ended up bolting us onto their US agency, which was McCormick.
yep,
And met another influential guy in my life, Mark Perrin.
yep.
Mark was the head of McCormick, and we had a really, really nice, productive partnership from 2007 to 2012, when, in a reversal of fate, Ogilvy pushed them out of the nest. We managed to survive. We're like the cockroaches after the nuclear war. They can't get rid of us. And the reason we survived was we had that deep ag knowledge, and we were
Yeah.
extremely responsive. So Ogilvy's a lot of things, the good things. They're clearly one of the leading agencies, but they are not fast and they don't know ag. So we held our place at the table, had a relationship with Becker Underwood. And so basically, I had then created the same thing I did the first time, this time totally non-strategically again, but here we were.
So how did you went from marketing 911, and then how did that then become Kahntact 2.0?
Um, there's kind of a tactical thing. So in 2012, when McCormick was displaced by Ogilvy, we were still in the mix. And so I came up with the name Marketing 911. I'll admit I was drinking a martini at the time and I thought it was brilliant. And every single person since then told me it was stupid. They said, makes me feel panicky. What is it? Is it an emergency? And so we had this window where things are changing, wonder. So I talked to a bunch of people. Why don't you just call it Kahntact? Everyone knows what that is.
Yeah.
So I had to do the call of shame. I called Roger Ryerson, who was the head of, the entity, now the head of the entity that had bought Kahntact in the first place. I was all nervous. Like, I was going to ask, can I have my name back? And he goes, we killed that long ago. Why would I care? And that was Roger being really nice and generous. So it was more or less just a change for change's sake.
Yep.
And but there is something, you and I are in the business, we talk about branding all the time, and it's a little hard to define, but most people associated me and what I did with the name Kahntact.
Yep.
So it's just, that was it.
Yeah.
Instead of Kahntact Marketing Inc., we just called it Kahntact, and everyone still called it Kahntact Marketing.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah.
There you go.
Well, you've given me heck a numerous times with I include the marketing still.
Yeah.
But so there you go. So so then consolidation continues in our industry, right?
Yep.
And all those things. So your Kahntact 2.0, my favorite story is essentially, you've already alluded to it, how essentially you sold Kahntact to the same people again.
Well, it sounds like a really good story. Like, I started this, I sold it, then I sold it to the same people again. So it wasn't. Somewhere around 2015. I'm 60 years old now. I've always had this belief, and I still believe it. There aren't a lot of happy old advertising guys. Our industry, for whatever reason, I can't explain it. Like, we're not doing neurosurgery, or it's not a life and death job, but it's got a fair amount of stress to it. And I started thinking, at some point, what am I going to do with this company? And so, shopped it around a little bit, had a bunch of conversations. And then Ben Graham, who's the president of Ad Farm, and I, as we are wont to do, had a momentous beer at the Shakespeare Arms. And I told him, what I was up to and what I was thinking. And he said, well, why don't I talk to our board? Because now Ad Farm was part of this larger entity called RR46.
Yep.
And there was my buddy Roger Ryerson at the top of that. And I didn't know Andy, his son, too much, but I knew a bunch of the players. And it really came down to that: a beer with Ben Graham, good for your soul. And
Yeah.
and as we looked at it, there seemed to be a strategic fit. Kahntact was and is different but the same than the other agencies within RR46. We're a smaller cousin, let's say, to Ad Farm.
Right.
It helps with conflict management. We had a slightly different model. So the deal seemed to make sense for both people, and that's the best kind of deal. So again, Red, I wish I was really smart and strategic and I saw this coming, but a beer with Ben Graham, you never know what's going to happen. So I did have it in my head that this is where I wanted to go. It is kind of ironic and it's funny, but as you know, it's comforting to do business with people that you share values with and you share some history with. And so when I became part of the RR46 family, and I hope it felt the same to them, there wasn't a jarring moment. It just sort of melded together.
Yeah. And no, they've done a good job at that model. Others have tried it, including, you already mentioned McCormick, when they became part of a company called Sandbox, which is no longer around. They did it because they stuck to what their original vision was. And I think they were built on a core of the values based in ag, right? Which is, again, brings it back to why we love the industry we work in. So,
well, I'll just reflect on one other story. So I'd forgotten this, but when we came together in 2002, there was Fieldstone, there was Kahntact, and there was Parker Group / Ad Farm. And you alluded to it. Agencies do not get along well together. We say we do, and we'll tell clients, hey, we can work together, but we typically don't. And so Kim did one of the smartest things that I've ever seen in business. He brought the leadership group from all three companies together. I think we were in the Calgary area. I can't remember if it was Calgary or Canmore. And he called it Rally in the Valley. And we spent that 3 days together. And the only thing we talked about were values, nothing else. He brought a facilitator in. And if Kim or someone, or you can find the notes from that session, I bet you will find that the values that were hammered out in 2002 between these three companies still permeate the entity today. And that's why values, it can be a bit of a nebulous concept and people have different ideas. But when you spend a significant amount of time with a group of people hammering out what your values are going to be, and then you live with them, then it permeates the organization and becomes your culture. And so immediately coming out the gate, something I'd never seen before, when we did performance reviews, it was a one-pager. We had 7 values, which I should be able to, the one I can remember is box busters. I'm sure I can think of the other. Box busters meant don't do average work, do great work. But anyway, when you did a review, you just went through the 7 values and how you measure up against each one of those. And I thought that was pretty neat.
No, that is smart. And a lot of good companies take that best practice now.
Yeah.
Well, Kim knew what he was doing. That's for sure.
Absolutely.